You're listening to the Valley Current.
Wow, that's quite a picture you've got there.
How are you?
Welcome in. You are the thought leader behind the concept of Myrony, which is your trademark, soon to be registered. We'll talk about that, among other things. But tell us how you first came up with the idea of Myrony, because I think it's a phenomenal idea.
Okay, Jack, first off, Myrony are the crazy coincidences that happen in life that you can't explain. So another word for it is sign or synchronicity. However, I've discovered that Myrony is a little bit different because it's actually synchronicity in motion. So we see these signs, we see these coincidences, which there are no coincidences, but it's what do you do about it? And so that's the difference between Myrony and synchronicity. So
let's go really slow, because you're saying a lot, and I want to unpack this, because you're saying you have observed what might be called a dynamic form of synchronicity. And that's what you mean by in motion. And you're paying attention to it, and you're getting others to pay attention to it, and it's causing the beginning of a movement.
Correct.
I'm not going to say it's at the level of Black Lives Matter yet, but I am going to say it has the potential to be at the level of Black Lives Matter, where if your life matters, you're going to be paying attention to these synchronistic, dynamic, synchronistic things that play out. I had one this morning, and I have to tell you, I sort of started writing it down, and then I got distracted. I have to save it for a different show, because it was such a knock me off my feet moment that played out. And it made me think of stuff that's so ancient, and we'll come back to it if I can recollect the thoughts. But of course, I actually believe that to do what you're suggesting, you need to wear a tape recorder around your neck. No, I'm serious, because you're going to have these moments that hit you, and you've made me become more savvy to them. I was somewhat savvy to them because I started reading about this stuff years ago, when people talked about how Einstein thought there was a funny form of physics that sort of the Earth moved around, or maybe the entire solar system moved around, that caused different things to kind of have a ripple effect. He never really wrote about it, but he talked about it. And, you know, people didn't really pick up on it, except recently, I think I sent you that article. Folks are talking about metabolic fields and how people either connect or don't connect, even at 6 feet social distancing. We'll put that all to the side, but you came up with this idea, and then you started a podcast, which is called Myrony, or what is it called, the podcast?
Called That's Myrony Podcast.
That's Myrony. That's Myrony. Okay.
Yeah, because the truth is, I want people to use the word Myrony freely. Myrony is just recognizing something greater than ourselves. And so when you say when creating a movement, yeah, I am creating a movement for people to share their Myronies in addition to their selfies on social media, because, you know, it's just a different form of content, but we don't have to just have things about ourselves. And also with Myrony, there's usually a lot of humor behind the Myrony. You know, you usually somehow are like, oh, that's really funny, you know, right. And I mean, sometimes you think that it's like, oh, really? Seriously? That's what just happened? But Myrony is just, I say Myrony is like the spiritual breadcrumbs that we follow. You know, the more we pay attention, the more we follow them, the more it's going to actually create miracles in our own lives and in the lives of others. And it's really just amazing when people just start paying attention, because my first episode is called Discover Myrony and Your Inner Superpower, because we all have it. No one.
Wait, hold on, because this is all going to go above the heads of most of the audience, even though they're very smart people, because they don't think about making observations that are unscientific. I'm going to say unscientific with quotes around it, because I think there might be a science here. I mentioned Einstein, but I think there might be a law of physics here. But you're not trying to say it's a law of physics. You're just saying open up your inner awareness to what's really going on around you, and you'll start to see signs of things that are communicating maybe either a higher power or your own internal higher power, whatever way you want to take it. But here's the punchline. It's not about being a Kardashian and taking a selfie. It's the opposite. It's the opposite of a selfie. It's the opposite.
Antithesis.
It's the antithesis of a selfie, which we're in the selfie generation. I want to drop a footnote here because, as you know, my brother died this month, and my mom is really freaking out over it. She's 90. It's a long story. He was the baby in the family. He was the only one to never get married. He was the only one to stay at home. It's a long story. There's a lot of stuff about, in an Italian family, the youngest son kind of gets treated like the replacement for the father. It's kind of a weird kind of Italian thing. We'll get into it some other time, but let me just tell you that the fact that what's going on right now is an observation about her history as she gets ready to die. And she's been telling all these stories that have Myrony in it. Of course, I can't really explain Myrony. She just says, these are funny stories that I remember, because you do tend to remember the stuff that's really funny. And she does come back with some stuff that's just like amazingly funny stuff. And I thought I should actually videotape this. But the point I'm saying about the antithesis that gets to the Myronic, if that's a word, point, is that my brother in hospice, he's dying of stage 4 cancer, and he's watching the Kardashians nonstop every episode across all 14 seasons. Every day I went to visit him. Every night I went to visit him. The same dribble is on. And I'm saying, Richie, you're like on your deathbed. You're on. He said, this stuff is amazing. I said, this is so old. Like I think we are ahead of ourselves in Silicon Valley, but the rest of the world, because in Florida, that's where he was in hospice. In Florida, they're all like still enthralled with the Kardashians and Southern California and Beverly Hills. And wow, and can you believe they didn't renew their show? They're not going to go on next year because they're going to do something else. And I found it, I almost wanted to vomit at some point. And I thought, you know, you are so ahead of the curve because you're saying the Kardashians wouldn't even understand the concept of Myrony. Now, maybe they'll copy you and actually follow you at some point. You're the you're the antithesis of the selfie, and they're like the total example of the selfie. I
actually say that if you capture a selfie within a Myrony, great, because it's still capturing something that's not just of me, or just in that way we're capturing something so much greater. And when you said Myronic, is Myronic a word? Yes, everyone has these Myronic experiences. When I started recognizing these signs, and I have a crazy story, as you know, Jack, and if people want to listen to that story, they go to That's Myrony podcast, listen to episode 1, and listen to any of them because they're really crazy in a good way. But when I used to be in sales, people say, how do you say your last name? And so my response was, it's like ironic, but with an M. And then for some crazy reason, I would add, there's a lot of Myrony in my life, and people would laugh. And then I realized because I would see these signs. So, here's the Myrony, your brother died of stage 4 lung cancer. That's how my dad died. And that's when all this started 16 years ago. And I was born, engaged, and married in the same hospital. If that's not a Myrony, I don't know what the heck is.
Oh, because you're visiting your father. You were visiting your father on the day that you were getting married? You were visiting your father?
So not on the day I was getting married. So what happened, I was born, so my father was terminally ill, and he passed very quickly in less than 4 months, within less than 2 months of being diagnosed with cancer. And my dad passed away on August 29th. I got married on August 22nd. And I was a total daddy's girl, only daughter. And so when we knew he chemo or radiation, he went straight into hospice. And he also wanted to be versus being at home. He wanted quality time. My father was such an amazing man in that he went from finding out to complete acceptance. He didn't go through the other stages. So I knew he was going to die very quickly. And I was crying to my dad's younger sister, my aunt, and I was like, I cannot believe my dad won't see me get married one day. And I had been with this guy for 2.5 years. He was absolutely one of my good soulmates, but we get free will. But I knew I was going to marry him, and she's like, why don't you get married? So here's the Myrony. While I was in the hospital, in hospice, I called down to, I was in the restaurant business, and the restaurant that he and I met at was called Restaurant 821. So I call him at the restaurant and ask him if he wanted to get married next Sunday. And what's really funny is that we actually, because of everything that happened, we actually thought we were getting married on 821, but we ended up getting married on 822. But that week that led up to it was like, I had the perfect wedding dress, the dress of my dreams, first dress I tried on, shoes were last pair in my size. Like, miracles were literally happening for this wedding to happen. Even down to the day before, it was torrential downpour because we were going to have the reception in the courtyard of a hospital. Like, how is this possible? Well, because the story was supposed to come out. So, it was like this torrential downpour. And it was just like, well, what are you going to do? And that's when I actually said, if there truly is a God, he will not take this away from my father. And at that time, I will admit, I had turned against the concept of God because of religion. But I realized that there was something so much greater. I always believed in something higher. But the next day, there was not a cloud in the sky, not a drop of rain. I mean, it was a California day in New Jersey, and that's unheard of after a rain like that. No humidity. And I felt the highest presence possible. But then 11 months later, my whole life fell apart. My ex-husband, he left me for another woman who ironically lied about having many crazy things. And my story got crazier and crazier and crazier, and, depression, suicide attempts, and, alcohol, prescription drug abuse. But I went through all of it to find this higher understanding. And how I found that higher understanding was, ironically, my friend who took my wedding pictures, who witnessed everything, she gave me this book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And Dr. Brian Weiss was an agnostic psychiatrist back in the 80s.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.